parents are having their children removed simply because they were once in care themselves or because they were a victim of domestic violence, is this justifiable and acceptable?
Well, there's a contentious statement at the beginning of that which I might not necessarily agree with. I mean, the starting point in law is that the welfare of the children is paramount. Not either of the rowing parents, not the performance targets of the social workers, not the fact the government's facing an election the next year or any of those things. It's the welfare of the children that everybody is required by law to be focused on, and decisions have to be taken about what's in the best interest of the child. Now, it's not in the interest of a child to take a child off loving parents simply because a parent's been in care in the past, and that would be a wrong decision of any court if it made a decision on that basis, that shouldn't happen. But we have to look at the behaviours of people and the effects on children. It's very difficult sometimes to establish the facts because people disagree very strongly. If something goes on behind closed doors, there might be 2 adults and 1 child present, and it's the child that comes out injured. It doesn't tell us exactly what went on inside, and the best evidence is what people say, but they might not all say the same thing, and somebody might not be honest. Then how does the state outside, seeing that there's a child in need of some help, how does the state and its agencies decide what is the best action for the best welfare of that child? And those are the kind of complexities of dealing with a simple principle: the welfare of the child comes first. It isn't very easy afterwards to get to the bottom of what's happening, what's the right response to what's happening, and how to come to a solution that actually ensures that the child is supported. One of the best things the government's done recently is in the children's plan and the 5 outcomes for all children, which does help focus people's thinking on what are the right issues to be judging in terms of how best to support children in their welfare. So will they be healthy? Will they stay safe? Will they achieve and be happy in their studies? Will they feel that they're making a positive contribution to their communities? And will they, in the longer term, achieve economic well-being for themselves? And people, I think, through that 5 outcomes, have become more focused on trying to do that judgment about what's in the best interest of the child. And there's been money and resources behind the children's plan, which has been very welcome. And for children specifically in care, there's a Care Matters as kind of supplement to the children's plan, which again has started to focus people on the things that need doing in terms of the quality of social workers' work with families, their ability to collect evidence, and their kind of thinking about what is the best interest of the child. So maybe, I mean, it's quite recent, but maybe we're beginning to kind of move in the right direction, but it's awfully slow, and there'll be a lot of children in the meantime whose future lives depend on decisions being taken right now.
And what can be done to help parents who have not had very good parenting themselves as children to equip them with better skills to parent their own offspring?
Do you know, that's a brilliant question, because that kind of illustrates what I was saying earlier on, that there will be people, through no fault of their own, who might not be very good parents without some kind of guidance. I think if we kind of go back in time, probably traditionally, families didn't split up so much, and grandparents were around and closer to home, and perhaps there was more of the kind of informal imparting of that kind of information, guidance, teaching, instruction, whatever we want to call it, available to young mums at the right time. And a lot of that, I think, has been lost in modern times, and it hasn't been replaced. A glib answer would be, well, there should be something in the school curriculum about this. I think that is part of the answer, but it isn't the only part of the answer. And that's why I'm so keen on us, as a society, feeling that there is kind of a national support for parents, and that we all understand how important parenting is. I mean, even people who make a life choice not to have children ought to believe that it's really important that parents bring up their children well, and that therefore that's an interest of the state. And the danger for politicians is that we'll get accused by the media of nannying and nanny state if we dare to step into these waters. But I think without the state getting involved, even though we recognise the limits of what we're capable of doing, the danger is that these things won't get corrected, and I think there is a need to correct them.
Many children are removed not because of any harm they have suffered, but because of a likelihood of future emotional harm in the future, because of crystal ball predictions made by a social worker. What are your views on likelihood of emotional harm being used as a significant risk?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I've been a lawyer myself, so I've actually been involved in cases where likelihood of harm is one of the factors that's under consideration by the court. In my book and in the cases that I was involved with, there had to be some real evidence to show why that could possibly be so, because it would be so easy to take on trust somebody's word that they think there's a likelihood of danger in the future. And that's very important, not to accept that on its own, even though we might accept a professional person's judgment as part of the evidence. Nevertheless, making the assessment and coming to that conclusion has to be based on evidence. And I think that the danger is that there isn't a good enough evidence for something which, as you say, it's not certain. We can't be sure. A likelihood of harm in the future is the proposition. The reason there's such a proposition at all in law is because the welfare of the child is paramount, and therefore sometimes some preemptive action by the state's agents is justified in order to stop something that would be terrible if it did happen. But just by saying that it would be terrible if it did happen shows, to my mind, the threshold should be very high for accepting that's a reason for intervening.
Emotional harm has no clear definition in the law. Can you define what it is?
I think rightly it isn't defined, because emotional well-being is it's a peculiar thing to every individual, but it matters to every individual. So that it will be something that could easily stretch a very, very long way. And emotional harm for a very young child who's being deprived of all stimulation is a different thing from the emotional harm of somebody who's being allowed as a teenager out late at night with no supervision. They're very, very different things, and it would be very difficult to come up with a very simple definition of that. It depends on the individual. And the reason that we have court cases in the end is that they do focus on the one individual case, and only, this is how it should be, only the evidence of the case in front of the judges, not anything else. So not speculation, not how it was in somebody else's case, but in this case, with this evidence, is there emotional harm? Has there been emotional harm? Is there a risk of emotional harm?